Yo guys, I got a spark which I'm gonna use to ignite the fire for an annual tradition here on the channel. This time last year we looked at my entire Blu-ray collection. Since then it's clear to see that the collection has grown, so buckle down and prepare for a long video right here, because after the intro has played itself out we're going to look through every single one of these 230 unique items you currently see before you. So here we go then, we get to start with the Terminator 2 Judgment Day. Very clear fan favourite, that one, with good reason, for it's a great movie. But moving on from there, we have Liam Neeson for Commuter. Simple name, I suppose, a film that I'm yet to watch, so I have no comment. But on the other hand, we do have right here Hang On, or aka Cliffhanger, starring Stallone of all people. So yes, there is Cliffhanger itself, followed by E.T. the Extraterrestrial, very iconic cinematography here, done by Steven Spielberg himself, the man from myth, the legend. Anyway, here we have Jason Bourne coming up next, followed by Midsummer for Director's Edition. So this has like 30 minutes additional runtime, and Florence Pugh is amazing in it, as she is with all of her performances. But next up, that leaves us with Pacific Rim 3D, one of my absolute favourite films of all time. Absolute blast, that one. Plus I love Guillermo del Toro's awesome direction. Enough of saying awesome far too many times though. But next on, we get to look at The Invisible Man, or at least the cover for it right now. Next part of the collection is Baby Driver, directed by Edgar Wright, his newest film besides Last Night in Soho, which I'm definitely getting when that releases on Blu-ray. That being said, our next Blu-ray is Unbreakable, here in the collection, followed by the first ever Blu-ray I got, Kung Fu Panda 2, no doubt you remember that from a previous collection video if you've watched it. Next up is going to be Marley and Me right here. Then we have Scoob. Pretty cool cover art that, even though the film was pretty disappointing. I normally like animated films, I love Scooby-Doo as a character, he's a huge icon of my childhood, and the film just basically let down in every conceivable way. That being said, we have Spotlight next, Best Picture at the Oscars I should go as far as saying, as well as the name of the Scarda, coincidentally enough, so that's awesome for two different reasons. Next up though, we have The Fighter, with Mark Wahlberg in a terribly removed sticker from the package there, or the box I should say. I need to get replacement boxes. Not for Scott Pilgrim vs. World, however, this one is in pretty good condition. Yet another Edgar Wright classic right there. Then we have Good Boys, followed by High Plains Drifter. I almost struggled for the name there, but yes, very cool western film. Then we have Inception, one of my personal favourites, especially by Nolan himself, Christopher Nolan that is. Then we have Creed 2, a film that went through a lot of production issues but turned out amazing. Goes to show that even films with troubled productions can really come through in the end. But next up we have City of Ember. The only reason I picked this up is because Ember's part of the name, and just like Spotlight, that is the name of a Skylander. Next up we have Arrival. I remember seeing this in Cineworld, and the man for sound, for visuals, very impressive stuff. But next up we have Cockneys vs Zombies. Very surprising film. This turns out is actually really fun in a so bad it's good kind of way. Great parody type film. Then we have one of my favourite international films, Train to Busan. Easily my favourite zombie movie of all time. The characters, just everything about it, production wise, phenomenal stuff, and it's incredibly fast paced too, so it has this entertainment value. Bit of rhyme there, making me poet without even knowing it. But next up we have It, as far away from poetry as you could get. Then we have Murder on the Orient Express, followed by Hell or High Water. This received the Best Picture nomination. Then we have The Magnificent Seven, starring Chris Pratt. Very interested to see him as a cowboy. Not going to apologise for that voice despite how terrible it was. But next up we have The King's Speech, yet another Oscar winner right there. One of my favourite films of all time, How to Train Your Dragon. Then we have Black Klansman, yet another highly nominated movies at the Oscars of its year group, and it's easy to see why, because the performances here, particularly by Adam Driver, is excellent, you know, and then there's just a really great message and theme behind the film as well, one that's really lasting and impactful. My apologies for the stuff right there, it's just The Conjuring on my mind. This film is incredibly eerie, and it truly is a fantastic horror film for making you feel scared due to said eeriness. So what is a horror film if it doesn't make you terrified now, right? With that being said, we have Avengers Assemble, not quite a horror movie, but a great movie all the same, when the Avengers very first assembled, he'd go as far to say. But next up we have Once Upon a Time in the West, huge classic that one, followed by Gravity. Then we also have Shawshank Redemption, notoriously one of the best films ever made, with good reason, is one of my personal favourites, so you can count me on the many list of people who love this movie. But that means that next up we are led to the 100th anniversary of Universal, where they re-released Jurassic Park from 1993. Classic film, Spielberg again, and I love it. After that cut right there, we go straight into Pixar's Soul. Excellent film, one of Pixar's best, especially visually. The lighting in that film looks almost photorealistic. It's mad how good Pixar's animation standards are these days. But moving on, we have The Artist, yet another very successful film, critically that is. Then we have Wonder Woman, one of the best DC films ever released, because you have a main character that's flawed and the arc she goes through is quite relatable despite her literally having the power of the gods. Next up we have Dragonheart. Then that's going to be followed by Blair Witch Project, a film based on found footage, so it's got a lot of scares to it due to the natural realism and eeriness. But next up we have Hellboy 2 for Golden Army. That's the 2-disc collector's edition, that right there. Excellent indeed. But that's followed up by my favourite Marvel film and one of my favourite films of all time, Guardians of the Galaxy, 3D version included. Which leads us on to another MCU film, Ant-Man, which released shortly, well, just over a year after Guardians of the Galaxy, should I go as far to say. But that's followed up by Real Steel, starring Hugh Jackman and a boxing robot named Adam. Great film, that one, very underrated. But next up we have Black Swan. Despite this being a film about dancing and all that, this is not a film to sit at home with your family and sit through and watch. Very violent, very eerie, and it's definitely got some really great horror elements to it. I would recommend just not as a family film, because it's not what you expect despite the whole dancing setup and all that. I can't really talk too much about it because it's been a while since I watched the film. Speaking of films I haven't watched in a while, Boyhood, a film that was literally shot over years. The same boy actor is growing up throughout the film naturally. It just really gives a sense of, well, the title, Boyhood, very well made, and I applaud the dedication and the ambition of that project. That leads us next to The Nice Guys, really great tag team between Russell Crowe and Ryan Gosling right now. Then we have The Wolf of Wall Street, followed up by one that I didn't take the stickers off just yet, Interstellar, my favourite Christopher Nolan film, and again one of my favourite films of all time. And that's followed up by my favourite X-Men film actually, Days of Future Past. Wouldn't pick this up because it's on Disney Plus, so regularly I don't tend to pick up those kind of films that can be found on those streaming services. But this was an exception given it was 50p and wasn't exactly in a bankrupt me with that price. Next up we have the In-Betweeners movie, based on the iconic British TV show of the same name. Then we have I, Tonya, yet another massive success at the Oscars of the year it came out. Very deserving. Margot Robbie's performance in that, spectacular. But that brings us on to A Beautiful Day in the Neighbourhood, one of Tom Hanks' newest films and one of his best. Very heartwarming tale. But with that being said, we have The Prestige next, followed up by Beautiful Boy. Yeah, very cool, that one. You cannot reflect the light out of it, that is. But next up is The Italian Job 40th Anniversary Special Edition. You were only supposed to blow the bloody doors off. Yep, that, my friends, is indeed what was voted as the most iconic film quote of all time. But moving on, we have Rear Window. Yeah, people who haven't even seen The Italian Job have heard of that quote, but I should really get my head in the game because Parasite's coming up next, yet another excellent international film like Train to Busan. Then we have Alpha. Very underrated film right there. Sony doesn't normally hit it out of the ballpark with films, which is why it was such a surprise to see Sony absolutely nail it with that one. But following that, we have The Exorcist. And we also have Pokemon Detective Pikachu, much better than it has any right to be. Live action Pokemon can be pretty weird though and freaky visual wise, but that brings us on to W. Thanos is in this. Josh Brolin. Bizarre name for a film. I haven't watched it yet, but the premise is sounding interesting based on the fact that Thanos alone is in it, or at least the person who plays him. But that brings us on to Overlord next. Very interesting box art, lots of blood, appropriate for an 18, I guess. But that brings us on to yet another 18, Snatch. Then we too have Defiance with James Bond himself in it, Daniel Craig right now. Next up we have Dazed and Confused. I saw this one at CX and saw that it's critically well received, so I thought why the hell not pick it up. Then we have Live, Die, Repeat, aka Edge of Tomorrow, Tom Cruise and Emily Blunt in that one. Followed up by Raya and the Last Dragon, very good Disney animated film. Disney have just been, you know, hitting the ball out of the park for their last few animated films without a doubt, besides their sequels. Of course, Frozen 2 and Ralph 2 weren't quite on the same level as their regular output. But that brings us on to Psycho, one of Hitchcock's classics and one of the biggest film classics of all time. Very memorable, very well known, but that brings us on to one that's not so well known, Lady Bird. Hidden gem, this one, I guarantee it, couldn't recommend more. But then there's Inglourious Bastards and The Book Thief. Two excellent Blu-rays to add back to the top of this pile beside me as I reach for Dragged Across Concrete. Very well put together film, the acting, the casting, perfect for its premise. But next up we have The Hateful Eight, two films there to where the direction and execution are their strong points, even if they aren't necessarily the best films overall. But next up there's going to be Gladiator for one, starring Russell Crowe, because I understand there are like 40 films under that name, but we're talking about the Russell Crowe one here. Directed by Ridley Scott, I think, don't quote me on that. But next up is Diary of a Wimpy Kid 3, Dog Days. Followed by Manchester by the Sea right here. I keep blocking myself with these Blu-rays, but that brings us to Venom next. Half of Tom Hardy's face is blocked off by Venom, so, you know, I'm not the only one who's blocking faces over here, apparently. What a smooth transition right there. Regardless, next up is Spider-Man Homecoming. Oh, and this is yet another Sony film. 3 Sony films in a row, and 3 very good Sony films in a row, with the exception of Venom. So technically 2 very good Sony films in a row. Homecoming and Searching the highlight of the 3, because man, this film was good, and it's all filmed from the perspective of a computer screen, almost in a one-take type motion. So well put together, without a shadow of doubt, nor hint of sarcasm. But following that up is going to be the original Hellboy on Blu-ray right there. Then we have Lone Survivor, starring Mark Wahlberg. I have lots of Mark Wahlberg movies that would turn out. You know, The Fighter from earlier was also something starring Mark Wahlberg. Not Paranorman, however, he does not voice in this animated film. But it's a very good animated film still, with or without Mark Wahlberg. Next up is Insurgent, even. The only reason I picked this up is because I got the name confused with Interstellar, and I thought this was Nolan's Interstellar, but it's not. It's part of the Divergent series, which makes it awful by default. My bad, that's what I get for mixing up names. Next up, though, is The Lego Movie, a name that's very hard to mix up, but it's a very good film. Big surprise. You wouldn't expect a movie solely about Legos to be so ingenious and creative as it was, full to the brim with colour, humour and heart. I love that film. Easy to say. But next up is Valerian, City of a Thousand Planets. Yes, another one I haven't watched yet. Then we have Shazam, another one of DC's best efforts alongside Wonder Woman. Then we have Pixar's Onward, very underrated film right here. If you have Disney Plus and haven't seen this film yet, what are you doing with your life? Go watch it. Very good Pixar film. Maybe not as good as Soul that came out the same year, but very good all the same. Now next up is going to be Arena with Samuel L. Jackson and Kellen Lutz. I hope I pronounced that correctly. But yeah, Samuel L. Jackson is basically the reason I bought that, and it was 50 pence, so again, it didn't exactly bankrupt me. Next up is Coraline. My apologies about that cut once more. We move on now to the 310 to Yuma. That's lots of twos I said in conjunction with one another right now. Reminds me of Awesome when that couldn't come out of my mind for the beginning of the video. But speaking of awesome things, we have Glory, very well critically received film right here. Then we have The Adventures of Tintin, The Secrets of the Unicorn, limited 3D edition, which is a bit of a mouthful, but still excellent film. This one, it's kind of like a blend of live action and animation, and its visuals are fantastic. I've chopped a bunch of my Blu-rays right now, or at least the stack fell over, but that's not going to stop me from featuring Wall-E and Limitless, one from Pixar, one starring Bradley Cooper, who is an animated raccoon in the Guardians of the Galaxy film. So are they really all that different, these two random films I picked out right now? Rhetorical question. They are exactly the same, obviously. Next up we have Darkest Hour, followed by my childhood movie, Cars. I must have watched this religiously when I was younger. But next up is going to be Tom Cruise in American Made, followed up by Kung Fu Panda. We saw the sequel earlier, and here is the original, the second best Kung Fu Panda movie. I rank them for third being the worst, then number one is right in the middle, and number two is obviously the best one. Moving on though, we have Hugo in 3D. Yet another SCADA name, but this time it's an NPC, I guess. But speaking of SCADAs, we have Deja Vu. It's another SCADA name, but I'm getting Deja Vu right now because we saw the In-Betweeners one earlier, and now we get the In-Betweeners too. Man, why are these transitions working as well as they are? But we find ourselves with Superbad, a 2-disc extended edition, followed up by Two Mules for Sister Sarah. I bought this one because it was an interesting title. You're going to see a lot of that later on. Anyway, next up is Will Smith in I Am Legend. Following that is the longest name in film history, it feels like, Birds of Prey and the Fantabulous Emancipation of One Harley Quinn. You see what I mean? Mouthful right now. But next up is Rise of the Planet of the Apes, the kicker offer of one of the greatest film trilogies of all time, and that's going to be followed up by Mad Max Fury Road. Here I am again after yet another cut. I did warn you guys to brace yourselves for this is definitely a long video, you can tell so from a timestamp below. But moving on, we have Life of Pi. Then we have Blade Runner for Final Cut. Very cool re-release that one right now, so the director could finally get his vision for how the film ended out there, rather than the more play it safe theatrical type ending that they released just to satisfy audiences and create a better word of mouth, I suppose, because audiences just like a happy ending rather than more of a divisive one, and like the director originally intended for the film. With that being said, we have The Winter Soldier next, one of my favourite MCU films, my second favourite in fact, second to the original Guardians of the Galaxy. That's why I picked it up on Blu-ray, because I think it's such a good film. Now next up is going to be Landed by the Light, Flashwing's Catchphrase, again another Scar's reference. But that being said, we have James Stewart in Harvey, very old, very big classic though. But next up is Brick, one of Rian Johnson's very first film, if not his very first film. Again, do not quote me on this, but it's interesting how he goes from that to Star Wars The Last Jedi. You won't be seeing that coming up here because A, it's on Disney Plus, and B, it's kind of, well, shit. So why would I pick it up on Blu-ray? Next up though is going to be Speed, followed by Will Smith in I, Robot 3D. He just can't help himself but being for I, something or another, titled films, that Will Smith. Anyway, I itch my nose and move along to A Monster Calls. A Monster Calls me to itch my nose, apparently. There's another cut for good measure right there as we move on to the DreamWorks film Abominable. Very tailored towards the Chinese audience, that one, but I'm okay with that kind of culturally enriched in nature because it is a very good film with excellent animation, even if the story is about as predictable and safe as it could possibly be. And sure, that creates a hindrance on my pacing, but hey ho, no film can be perfect. But we move on next to yet another Tom Cruise film, Oblivion! Followed up by, well, Love Actually. Next up we have Stanley Kubrick's classic 2001 A Space Odyssey. Then that's followed up by Ponyo. And then we get one of my favourite duologies of all time, Quiet Place Part 2. And the original. Oh yeah! But then we move on to Bolt, another one of Disney's classic animated films. But then there's Dead Man's Shoes. This did a lot of interesting things with editing. It's a shame that it didn't win any awards for editing actually. But yeah, I actually had to do a full editing analysis of the scene in that film. And that's why I know so much about the editing work and production that went into it. Yes, the editing is good, but moving on now, we have The Railway Man. Yeah, we've got to hurry up and get through these, otherwise I'm going to be editing it down myself. You know, I'm going to have to put as much work into my edit. This one video is what they must have done for that entire film, Dead Man's Shoes, from earlier. But moving on, we have Snoopy and Charlie Brown the Peanuts movie, one of the biggest surprises I've ever seen. It's actually a really heartwarming and fun animated movie by Blue Sky Studios, of all things. It's the fact that it's from Blue Skies that makes it as surprising as it is, because the only films they ever made that were any good were Robots and the first Ice Age film. But moving on, we have Super 8, one of Spielberg's films, not one of his best, but one of his films all the same. Then we have Cowboys and Aliens. I don't know why it's Cowboys and Aliens rather than Cowboys versus Aliens, because that's practically what it is. But never mind, it's combining two genres at the end of the day, sci-fi and western, two very juxtaposed genres that do not mesh well together at all. Next up though is going to be The Accountant, a very terrible box. I need to get that one replaced. It's sticky too, and now my hands are all yucky. Next up is going to be Hereditary, very good animated film, horror film. It's certainly not animated. But yeah, next up we have 12 Years a Slave, huge award winner. You can see it, that was main advertisement on the Blu-ray up top over there. That's going to be followed up by American Sniper. Again, we've got Bradley Cooper in this one. Next up we have The Counselor Extended Edition, very familiar faces in that. But next up is going to be The Armstrong Line, good stuff. But next up is Nightcrawler with Mysterio himself in it, and by that I mean Jake Gyllenhaal, of course. Then we have Widows, huge hidden gem, couldn't recommend this one to you more. This film is fantastic. This film, however, not so much. We have Mulan, the 2020 live action remake. Man, that film was hot garbage. The Shape of Water, however, is one of my favourite films of all time. Guillermo del Toro really pulled off all the stops of this one. It is phenomenal. Definitely deserved to win Best Picture. But moving on, we have Looper. Very interesting the direction of that one. But concluding here, we have The Breakfast Club 30th Anniversary Special Edition. Can't wait to watch that at some point. Same with Land of the Dead. I have many classic films to go back and watch or rewatch. We have The Ghost over here. And when I said earlier about names for films that are so weird and odd that I just had to pick them up after having read them, well, this is one of those names. Picked it up for the name alone. The Men Who Stare at Goats. How can you see a legendary name like that and then not proceed to pick up a Blu-ray? Anyway, here comes the last Blu-ray from our standard collection. It's Apocalypse Now. So I will see you after the cut for the collector's sleeves. So we get to kick things off with Red State, a film that's unnecessarily brutal. Spoiler alert, everybody dies needlessly and I hate it. Yeah, so not a strong start for the collector's sleeves here, but next up is Blade Runner 2049. This is a sequel done right. Absolutely fantastic film. Speaking of fantastic films, we have the film that really started to get me into musicals, La La Land. Definitely deserving of all of the awards it won. But next up we have Ad Astra. Sure, it's a bit of a boring, slow-paced film, but for someone like me who looks more into the craft and production of the film, this one is excellent, especially on a visual spectrum, on a character writing spectrum, and of course Brad Pitt does great in the main flagship role, shall we put it. But next up is going to be Now You See Me. Spectacular all-stars cast in that one. Followed up by Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. You could say the same for this here classic from Quentin Tarantino. Probably his second to last film, because I'm pretty sure he's gone out on record saying the next film he directs is going to be his last. Anyway, next up is Emma. Very underrated period drama of that. Then we have Hacksaw Ridge coming up next. Excellent film, that one. Then we have Knives Out, Rian Johnson's huge step up after the mishap that was The Last Jedi. At the end of the day, he's a very good director. Not for the Star Wars franchise, on the other hand. Next up we have Bumblebee, my favourite of all of the Transformers movies. It's the only one that has actual heart and thought and effort put into its characters and its direction. Because Trappers Knight knows what he's doing, at least character-wise, and being iconic and just giving us the feels. Anyway, speaking of the feels, I have a lot of nostalgia for Cars 2 over here. Sure, it's not Pixar's best film, but as a kid I adored this film, and just like the first one, I watched it religiously. Therefore, I have a little bit of nostalgia and bias towards it. That being said, our next film is Total Recall, with Schwarzenegger himself. Then we have Ben Affleck starring in Finding the Way Back, followed up by none other than Drive Angry. I picked this up, just as kind of like a film that I knew was going to be hot garbage and I could just watch for the ironic enjoyment, and I got exactly what I was expecting with it. It's not a good film in the slightest, but it was, well, fun, to be perfectly honest. Anyway, this film is a direct opposition to that, because War for the Planet of the Apes is fantastic. What a way to end off that trilogy, I'm telling you. Now, next up we have The Iron Giant, 1999 that. But then we also have The Martian, Matt Damon himself, that one. Speaking of Matt Damon, Le Mans 66, where he teams up with Christian Bale for a film that has a little bit of something for everyone. As a car buff, you can enjoy all of the car scenes. As a film buff, I can enjoy all of the excellent writing and production value. And it's a fast-paced movie that the casual audience is going to find entertaining. Hence why the film is one of those few films that truly does have something for everyone. Anyway, next up is Gandhi. Very specific audience, that one, very targeted, unlike Le Mans, where it can be enjoyed universally. Now, next up is The Conjuring. I love this collector's sleeve. Looks so good, hence why I picked up a second copy of it. Totally worth it for that there collector's sleeve. Anyway, next up is going to be Deadpool 2, the super duper cut, 15 minutes extra. Doesn't really add much to the film, but it's nice to have it there. Then there's Wonder Woman 1984, a very underwhelming sequel, if I'm being perfectly honest with you. Now, next up is going to be Logan, including Logan Noir. Now, I love this one even more than X-Men Days of Future Past, and you know how much I love that one, so it's fair to say how much I love this one when I'm not about to drop it, that is. Next up is If Beale Street Could Talk, one that I really need to watch. Looks very good, so it's surprising to me that I haven't gotten around to it yet. But next up we have Benedict Cumberbatch and Keira Knightley in The Imitation Game. I showed the pronunciation of that one there, but an excellent film. And speaking of excellent films, we have How to Train Your Dragon 2, my favourite film of all time. Absolute masterpiece. I adore this movie. And I have a collector's sleeve to prove it. Anyway, next up is Deadpool, yet another comic book film. I have lots of those, including Avengers Infinity War. I love that cover art right there. Sure, it's a little bit busy, but the busyness just really goes to show you the chaos and also the culmination of the film, all of the different plot lines that just come together as an excellent next step in the MCU storyline. Next up, however, is going to be The Revenant, recently added to Disney Plus, so for those of you in the UK who have Disney Plus, definitely go check that one out. Next up we have Doctor Sleep for Director's Cut. Very good film once again, even though it was pretty brutal. So my apologies about that cut right there. It's time to get back to these Blu-rays with collector's sleeves, and that's going to include The Personal History of David Copperfield. Quite a title, that one, but this is hilarious, but it's also heartwarming, and generally speaking, the tone and the execution is fantastic, so definitely a very underrated one, this Personal History of David Copperfield right now. Then we have Avengers Endgame. No Blu-ray collection would be complete without it. In fact, this collection is far from complete, but I'm proud of it, and that's what matters. Plus, Blu-ray collections are going to be so unique amongst individuals because everyone's going to own different Blu-rays. There's thousands of them, so the combination of Blu-rays you have is always going to be different from person to person. That being said, we have The Lady in the Van. I paid 50p for this. Haven't watched the movie yet, don't care about how good the movie is. I care about the fact that I paid only 50p for it. Next up there is Taxi Driver, another one I cannot wait to watch. Then we have The Thing, very iconic horror movie that. Can't wait to be watching that. And that is the 1988 version, I think. I can't remember the exact year. All I know is that it is not the shitty remake, so thank heavens for that. That being said, we have Quantum of Solace, one of Daniel Craig's 007 era movies. And next up we have a very heartwarming film, Military Wives. This film just puts a smile on your face, really. It does have some great emotional payoffs, and overall it's just a film that has a lot of charm, so it's quite difficult to hate. Then there's 1917. This movie, when I went to go and see it in a theatre with my mate Luke, we could not take our eyes from the screen. They were practically glued as we remained thoroughly invested in such a delicately crafted war film. Honestly, the fact that it's filmed in a one-take type motion, or at least it's edited together that way, just creates investment from beginning to end. Investment that really hooks you and never lets go. That being said, our next collector's sleeve is actually Toy Story 4. Very good film, like all the Toy Story films. But then we have Dunkirk, another one of Christopher Nolan's classics. God love that right there. The cinematography in it is spectacular. Little Women I love because the actresses all have such excellent chemistry with one another. You know, Hermione Granger, Yelena from Black Widow. You know, you've got other actresses too. I'm sorry, I don't know what else they're from except from Lady Bird right there, which we saw from another Blu-ray earlier. But yeah, so the actresses, really excellent casting, really great chemistry to be had there. The Amazing Spider-Man, featuring the best Spider-Man, Andrew Garfield. Yes, he is the best Spider-Man, whilst not being the best Peter Parker in my personal opinion. That being said, our next one is a very interesting 3D Blu-ray because it's Legend of the Guardians. It's one of those to where the box art changes depending on the angle the light hits it at. So yeah, it's really cool collector's sleeve, that one. And there's also Jurassic World right down here. Certainly not one of my favourite films, but it's perfectly fun, even if not well made. I mean, seriously, some of the subplots are so dumb in that. Anyway, now we have one of my favourite action movies, John Wick 3, with 50% of John Wick Hex apparently, which I've never been interested by, but the film on the other hand, I love watching that. Such a fun action flick. Speaking of fun flicks, we have Rush right here, about the rivalry between two Formula 1 race car drivers, one of them played by Chris Hemsworth, and boy, this is a good movie. Like a really good movie. Speaking of really good movies, Tenet. Very underrated in my personal opinion. People seem to be unable to look past the audio mixing, which for me was absolutely fine. I don't know what people are getting at, because I heard the film in theatres with no problem whatsoever. Sometimes people just moan for the sake of moaning. Anyway, next up we have a very good thriller, Don't Breathe, because if you do, you're as good as dead. Also, Get Out! It's just a fun way of saying it. Two very good films right there as my Blu-ray stacks just continue to fall over. No doubt you hear that in the background. You can somewhat see me sorting things out from the direction my face was headed in. Anyway, next up, you got Flash Gordon. Cheesy 80s classic, I believe. I haven't watched it yet, but I certainly will get around to it. It was just a fun little anniversary thing to pick up. Next up is Joker. Joaquin Phoenix performance, and that is iconic with good reason because it's spectacular, and improv too. Pretty messed up that Joaquin Phoenix could just turn the acting on and off, to be honest. But with that being said, we have Django Unchained, one of my favourite action movies. Quentin Tarantino really blew it out of the park with this one. It's phenomenal. Then we have three more here. There's 12 Strong, The Dying of the Light, and The Fault in Our Stars. So yes, some very interesting pickups those were, all in the same session, ironically enough, so it's funny how I showcased them all at the same time here. Anyway, now we have the final Dawn of the Planet of the Apes movie to look at. Well, just Planet of the Apes, it's part of that trilogy, but this is the Dawn iteration, the second one, right in the middle of the trilogy that does its job perfectly. It expands upon the original, leaves room for the sequel to expand upon it, leaves it for hair to get in the cracks of my Blu-ray stack right now. But yeah, excellent movie, great acting, great action too. The cinematography is phenomenal. You can't go wrong with that trilogy, and Dawn is one of the highlights. It has probably some of the best scenes of the entire trilogy, even though my favourite in the trilogy is War, the Planet of the Apes. With that being said, we not only have The Third Man, but we have 3 Blu-rays to cover now. We have The Social Network as well, which beat out How to Train Your Dragon at the Oscars for Best Original Soundtrack. I don't like that, but I do love the film. The film is fantastic. And so is Civil War, another one of my favourite MCU films. And of course, for one right in the middle, for Third Man. Very classic film, one I haven't watched yet, but it's a vintage classic, so I wasn't going to say no to the purchase opportunity. Anyway, we now have Avengers Age of Ultron, one of the weaker MCU films, unfortunately. That's going to be followed by yet another superhero film, The Incredibles 2. Nowhere near as good as the original, but Brad Bird still did well, and he still made the film fun with a great family dynamic. So it's still got that unique tone that made the first film so great. It's just not got as much pacing greatness, shall we say. It's not as fast-paced of a movie. The villain certainly isn't as great neither, for example. So yes, comparatively, The Incredibles 1 is better, but I still love The Incredibles 2, that goes without saying. With that being said, we have Spider-Man Far From Home, yet another superhero movie. Might as well get all the other superhero movies out of the way, because there's also Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. No Way Home recently came out, but this film is still better. Don't at me, this is the best Spider-Man film, hands down. The animation style is in a league of its own. The film is so stylized visually, it's so fast-paced, it's so fun, the characters have so much chemistry, the arcs and the themes are so heartwarming and pay off in fantastic ways. And then Far From Home is a film that exists, I guess. So yes, those are the Spider-Man films and specifically what I think about them. Spider-Verse being my favourite Spider-Man film of all time, quite possibly my favourite superhero film of all time if I'm being honest with you. And then we have Moonlight, yet another huge award winner with a good reason. And finally, for the collector's sleeves, we have Daniel Craig appearing as 007 once more in Skyfall. The only Daniel Craig Bond film I've watched is No Time to Die, but I've heard that Skyfall is another one of his highlights alongside Casino Royale, so I'm looking forward to checking them out someday. But what you guys get to check out in the meantime is all of my special edition and collections, so let's get to it. So here I am with either box set collections or special editions of Blu-rays, and that gets to be kicked off with the Men in Black trilogy. The second one is a huge letdown after how fun and fresh the first one is tonally. Luckily the third one made up for it. The third one was also really fun and excellent in the execution of it. The story is very creative as well, and the villain is just cheesy and yet so much fun at the same time. It's a very delicate balance. Anyway, I also have the Hidden World limited edition that came with 2 fancy mini Funko Pop keyrings, as well as the Blu-ray, DVD and 3D of the Hidden World. So excellent limited edition collectible item for that. Then we also have the Lighthouse, which I haven't thrown in here for some reason. I guess the box is black, which made me mistake it for the Hidden World, which I also have on 4K Ultra HD. The only How to Train Your Dragon movie I believe that was released in this format. Maybe the second one was as well, but that most certainly isn't common if it was ever released. Then we have the Titanic Collector's Edition. So this had 4 discs in it. It had 2 discs dedicated to special features, then it had the 3D and the Blu-ray. Very good film, very long, very emotional, one excellent and delicate build up to that, just shocking climax that, oh boy, if I talk about it for much longer I'm going to start crying myself to sleep. So next up, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the 40th Anniversary Collector's Edition. That is an excellent casing for it. and of course you get the great little bonus features alongside it. But moving on to yet another deluxe edition, we have Casino Royale, the final one of the Daniel Craig Bond film. So now, if I buy No Time to Die, I'll own the entirety of his legacy as the character. Then next up we have one of my favourite items, Kubo and the Two Strings Steelbook. You can even flip it over and just absorb this in all of its glory. It is a gorgeous and rare steelbook that I am beyond honoured to own. So yes, very happy about that item. Then we have from the premium collection, Top Gun. Following that up is for collections once again, for collection of both 21 and 22 Jump Street. It cost me £1 for both of those Blu-rays, so I won't say no to that. And it's the same with the Transformers 4-film collection, £1 for all 4 movies. They might be garbage movies, but £1 is still an excellent deal. Then we have the Bad Boys trilogy, 3 very underrated films, my personal opinion. They are Michael Bay at its best, at least the first 2. And the third one is my favourite one, probably because it wasn't directed by Michael Bay. It does kind of dial down a bit on the chaos and the madness, but you still have your chemistry between Will Smith and Martin Lawrence. So, very fun movies, very fast-paced too. But moving on from there, we have the Karate Kid collection. So this is Karate Kid 1 through 4. Very cool stuff, but easily one of my favourite items is for Harry Potter Complete 8-film collection. There's 16 discs here, 2 discs for each film. Man, this is bulky, it's heavy, but these are just some nostalgic, memorable movies for me. I grew up with most of these as I just about dropped them all. So yes, going back and binging those several times puts a smile on my face every time. But moving on from there, we have the Back to the Future trilogy. I love the shine of the artwork there. Then we have a Tarantino 5-film collection. There's what it includes. His very first one, the debut with Reservoir Dogs. And there's also Jackie Brown, both of the Kill Bill films, and Pulp Fiction. So yes, an excellent collection. That probably would have looked better this way up, but never mind. Moving on from there, we have the Bourne 4-film collection. So between this and Jason Bourne, I own all films from that particular franchise. Next up is Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy. Apologies for the stuttering right there, but excellent trilogy, this one. The second is my favourite of the 3. Then again, that seems to be the universal opinion because the Joker is in it, and boy, the acting for Joker, the performances just all around for this entire trilogy on that note are excellent. And dark is used for a reason. These films in tone are actually really dark, but perfectly executed. Then we have the Cornetto trilogy. Hilarious, fast-paced, and incredibly stylized. Only Edgar Wright could edit in this form of comedic prowess, you could say. And I love those films for how distinctive and memorable they are. But we move on to our final item to showcase today. For Mission Impossible 6-film collection. So this includes all of them 1 through 3, as well as, Ghost Protocol, Rogue Nation, and Fallout. Haven't watched all 6 of these movies yet. I plan to though, as they are 6 missions and 1 legendary hero. Well, action hero. If I'm going to read it, I should read it correctly. So yeah, so that pretty much does it for Blu-ray collection. It is massive, and I feel so honoured to have this collection. As I said earlier, it is unique to me, so that gives me an even greater connection with it. And I really appreciate the fact that you guys stood around to watch me go through these Blu-rays, talk about them for a little bit. And naturally, I'm going to be saving anything I collect throughout the year of 2022 for the collection update this time next year, because this is a tradition we've made out of it. So I will literally see you in 365 days for the next Blu-ray collection video. But until that moment arises, peace!